Gotta think about it.
We're live.
We are live, and this is our first Rabble Rants live. So, for folks that are watching, my name is Jessa McLean. I use she, her pronouns. I am normally the host of Blueprints of Disruption, but today you are watching me on our Rabble Rants feed. David, tell them who you are.
Hi, everyone. My name's David. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm an organizer in Waterloo Region as we watch the impending fall of civilization.
I thought you had said Trashism earlier, so I think we've maybe invented a new term that we're
Trashism, the
sitting here
rise of
watching.
Trashism.
Yeah, because folks are like, "Oh, you can't call it fascism; it doesn't check all the boxes," and like the fuck it doesn't. But either way, we have a new term. Maybe that'll be the title of this thing when we're done with it. But what we're going to do is just kind of rhyme off a few of the news items that have got us most riled up this week and unpack them a little bit. Obviously, from an anti-capitalist, activist, shit disturber kind of perspective. I was trying to talk to David about what perspective we were going to use. I'm like, ours, right? So just like two friends talking about what the fuck happened this week. And so we're going to start off, of course, we missed the unveiling of the Victims of Communism monument. So we want to acknowledge that moment. And then David's going to help us unpack the Safer Municipalities Act from Doug Ford. It's not that. I mean, the names they come up with these acts are so Orwellian, but you'll understand that once we go through it. I mean, if you're logged in here, I'm already being facetious. Then we're going to talk about the bubble law, and I was originally going to talk about it because Oakville was considering it. Vaughan had already passed it, but then Toronto went and was like, hold my beer, I want to join the club, and they have gone and joined the bubble law club. If you don't know what that is, stay tuned, we'll explain it. And it wouldn't be an episode with me if I didn't shit on the NDP at some point or another. No, I'm not a conservative if you're confused about what's happening here. I think that's too much sarcasm. I'm gonna actually confuse people. But Freeland resigns. I have personal beef with her. We'll talk about that. It has no reason to her resignation. It has nothing to do with it. I just like clout chasing through her. But Jagmeet also is pouncing on this as an opportunity. So we'll talk about that from a leftist perspective. And then if we have time, this should be about an hour for those who have somewhere to go. We'll have a few updates, because I don't. We'll have some updates that are related to some of the episodes we've put out recently. And if you haven't checked it out already, we just dropped our interview with Jews Say No to Genocide on the Blueprints of Disruption. So that'll be here on YouTube if that's where you're viewing us. And you can find it on all those podcast catchers out there as well. So enough about that. David, are you planning to visit the Victims of Communism monument next time you're in Ottawa? Did you Google a picture of that?
I've been waiting on bated breath all like for years now. As soon as I heard about it, I was like, I need to see all about these victims and whatnot. And it's beautiful. I'm flabbergasted at all the wrought iron and its convictions of emotions.
That's 4,000 metal rods. They say they're intertwined to look like two walls. They love to, they broke down the wall, right? So, oh, Lord. And you say years, and I mean, you might have been joking, but this has been in the works for a very, very long time. There have been people out there that wouldn't be joking when they said they have been working very hard to see this happen. I think in the end, it even cost us there's different numbers out there. I think $7.5 million was its price tag. And they can only manage to get folks to cough up the public to cough up $1 million in donations. And a lot of those donations came from people that really wanted to get their Nazi grandparent's name or parent or, I don't know, their hero on there. Because the thing goes up fucking blank. It's supposed to be a list of all these very specific victims we can point to. But what's the spoiler alert? Who are the victims of communism mostly, David?
Our friend, and this is something we know very personally in Waterloo Region because we were all about German imperialism here. Our friendly
Oh,
neighborhood German imperialists, you know,
we have another word for them. You could say it.
the Nazis.
The Nazis. Nazi names. And they won't even tell us. Nora Loretto did a good piece on this, and the Canadian government has a list now through one of their agencies, Canadian Heritage. That's another thing to unpack. We have a department up for Canadian Heritage. I can only imagine that is Orwellian what they're doing there, like rewriting history and whitewashing the shit out of that. But they've got a list of names, Nazi names that Canadians wanted to honor, and paid money to do so, but they won't tell us who this is. Like that's not a problem. That's not a red flag.
I just think this whole thing, they all like layer together in this, you know, when our country loves to talk about the past century with such really limited terms, as if these were the heroes and these are the good guys. And I think we're just watching in true Liberal Party glory that myth just completely fall apart. That it wasn't, you can't just be Canada was good, Nazis were bad, and then the communists were good and then they were bad. You can't just turn that into a simple story. And instead, what ends up happening is that when you try to do that, it means you cover up thousands of Nazis who are still in our communities today causing trouble.
I love how that blankness of the monument opens up opportunities for people. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not one to suggest any blueprints of disruption. But, there is a huge blank space on a monument proposing just fill in the blanks. And it's so strange that people for so long have been sold this history of what happened in World War II. I mean, I'm not going to turn this into a history lesson, but
we love history.
You don't need one now. It's there. It's like, look, these are the victims. I mean, they're going to say there's other victims. And obviously my retort is to, like, where's the monument for victims of capitalism? Mm-hmm. I mean, we're just living it. It's a living, breathing monument. This is one giant art installation.
Right now, I've been spending lots of time trying to make a memorial because essentially the victims of capitalism are our unsheltered community members who are dying every day. And so we're working behind the scenes in Waterloo Region to try and at least make some memorial. But again, we can't talk about it even with clear terms. They want to make this very clear narrative of, well, these people are the victims of communism. But we have people in our community who are dying every day because of our economic system, because of how financialized and privatized our basic rights are. But we can't talk about it that way, and it has to be couched in all these different things. So I think it's just very illuminating, right? I'm actually happy the memorial exists so that we can really talk about how fucking bullshit these narratives are and how many people are actually, like, how our relationship to death is so skewed by our kind of imperial narratives.
There's lots of cities that do have homeless memorials or, similar memorials. And someone suggested the other day that in the same way they announce like police deaths and whatnot, that premiers who are responsible for certain legislation should have to announce the deaths of their own victims. We talk about social murder. I guess like those would be the victims of capitalism. That's what our politicians are undoing. But I want to go back to your point of, like, we were talking about rewriting history and whatnot. I forgot to tell folks the name of the monument. It has a name, or like the whole installation has a name. A land of refuge. A land of refuge. Like, that is pretty ballsy. That's pretty horrible language from me. But that's... Can you imagine? They're talking about they're trying to harken back to World War II. That's really where the bulk of these victims purportedly come from. And they're talking about Canada being a land of refuge at that time.
I mean, we know that there were some people who were really trying to get out of Europe at that time to cover their asses.
Well, there were two in the end, right? There were two kinds of people. We let one kind in and we did not let the other kind in, right? Yes, Jewish people were coming over on boats, and the prime minister at the time, and I should have put this in my notes, his quote, who was it? Pearson? No. Anyway, like, one is too many was the reference to Jews fleeing the Holocaust in Europe, right? We turned them away. We were no safe refuge for them. But it looks like from the memorials that are already out and about, that we already know about, that actually honor the same kind of people they applauded in the House of Commons, they did find refuge here in Canada. It's so ironic they named it that. It is one huge history lesson, just unpacked for us almost, you know? Like it seems so tongue-in-cheek, and it's not. People seriously work to get that, but you know, I don't want to spend, I guess, I have all these notes about stupid little facts. Like, there's a whole organization behind honoring these victims of communism worldwide. This is where someone's donations go somewhere.
Well, I can say, like, on a personal level, this, like, I hear about this all the time in my community because I grew up Mennonite, and there are many Mennonites who were in the Soviet Union during the war and who were being, from their lens, they were experiencing persecution because they were rich landowners, and so that wasn't flying in the Soviet Union. And so there's been a long history of Mennonites and Nazis, because when the Nazis came and started attacking the Soviet Union at that time, these rich Mennonites felt it as like a liberation, right? And so, like, and to this day, we are still trying to unpack these difficult narratives within our own community about, like, okay, like, you know, we can't, like, our family histories can't be simple. They have to be complex, and we have to name how, you know, our family's relationship to class and relationship to race and religion impacted how we talked about things like the Soviet Union, like Nazis, and like Canada. Like, all three of these were empires that this community was navigating, and in some places they seem them as enemies, and some places they're a refuge, but it's always for that specific community. And what does it mean for the people on the other side of that community who were, you know, either being oppressed or oppressing? Like, I can see so many people in my community who would be like, yes, my grandparents were persecuted by the Soviet Union, and so this memorial means a lot to me. But at the same time, those people have turned a blind eye to the various waves, either Nazism or Canadian imperialism, that they have, like, been like, that's okay. And I think this is just because we don't have a good relationship with history. You know, we've kind of simplified our whole past, especially the past century. It's become so simple, and we are just running around acting like these contradictions don't exist, but they do in big ways.
That kind of reminds me of when people talk about Cuban exiles and, you know, being persecuted by Castro, or folks who came over from South Apartheid Africa, saying they were fleeing at a certain point in history. And yes, so both things, I guess, can be true, but definitely not a memorial I will be visiting. At least not with my face showing. But I have no segue for this, so we're moving on.
We're talking about refuge, right? Refuge, I think, is an important segue in the sense of who belongs and who doesn't belong. And the Safe Municipalities Act is drawing a very clear line in this end that many people in our community just don't belong, and that the government should violently enforce that not belonging.
And, like, this is, like, reinforcing a lot of the actions these mayors have already been taken. Yeah. So I see, like, we had an episode where we specifically talked about the level of encampment evictions, and the mayor's letter in Ontario, where I think it got up to 15 mayors asked the premier, under his direction, explicit direction, to defy the charter, to invoke the notwithstanding clause. They had a list of things that they wanted. Some of them were related to it. Some were just kind of window dressing, so they didn't come off as total ghouls. But in the end, yeah, it was like total criminalization of homelessness, of drug use. And this is already on top of years and years of, like, crackdowns. I think, like, 2021 is when the city really just started clearing encampments violently. I'm talking about the city of Toronto. And they're not alone. Because that is just, like, most of my perspective, and the folks that we've interviewed are centered in Toronto. And they, frankly, a lot of this stuff is, like, helping police. Like, you know, that I say that with as much, like, disdain as I can. But in terms of clearing encampments, I feel like mayors don't even feel like they need any extra legislation. They're almost doing it with impunity right now. But What specifically about the Municipalities Act can we flag for people?
Well, I want to start with where your point was these municipalities are already doing this with impunity, right? Like the mayor of Cambridge, who was one of the mayors, she's one I'm very familiar with her because she has been doing just like a kind of a stream of constant evictions in her community, saying these people aren't her residents and forcing them, moving them from place to place to place so that they're not able to stay for more than like a week or so before the mayor of Cambridge. And she's got this army of vigilantes with her who are really emboldened by her political cover to send drones around Cambridge, hunting people down and reporting them and violently attacking them themselves. So like this is the context of which a mayor is saying, I want to use the notwithstanding clause. And I'm like, why are they asking to use the notwithstanding clause? What they're really asking is for, you know, moral license to do for their bad behavior. They know what they are doing is violating the charter, or else they wouldn't have asked to use the notwithstanding clause. And I'll get even more specific about the notwithstanding clause. In Waterloo Region, we have the only court case in Ontario. I guess Kingston has one too, but we had the first court case in Ontario on encampments. The only right the charter right that court case recognized was the right to life. So when when the mayor of Cambridge is saying, "Oh, please let me use the notwithstanding clause," she's saying, "Hey, community, please let me violate the right to life of these people. Please let me kill these people." That's all she's asking for, and they're wanting the moral license to kill people. And the Safe Municipalities Act is the province's attempt to try and give as much of that license without being bogged down in legal battles, although I'm sure they will be bogged down in lots of legal battles. And I encourage listeners to
better be
support, legal funds and legal services that are trying to bog these things down in legal battles. But like what the act does is it's not like it's still in its provincial process, and who knows if they'll get it through before the election, but I know they're trying to. But it's asking to change two main pieces. One is around the drug consumption laws around drug consumption, and one is laws around trespassing. And essentially, what it's doing is it's criminalizing both of those things further in public spaces. So it's giving a whole new suite of fines and a whole new suite of tools that municipalities and police services can then enact upon either drug users or encampment residents, to be like, you are now you're trespassing and you need to go, or you're no drug use in public, and you have to put this in the context of everything else they're doing, right? Like they are closing the CTSs, so there isn't a safe place to use drug use privately, which is forcing people to use drug use in the public space. And now they're like, oh no drug use in public spaces either. We will fine you and send you to jail for 6 months. And so, I mean, I think part of this is a huge scare tactic to really, because I mean, what drug user or encampment resident has money to pay these fines? But it's also,
or do the legal battles, right? Like organizations are already stretched. It's a tactic, but it's an expensive one.
And I will say it's like a scare tactic to organizers and nonprofits who are all like terrified now that if the province is willing to increase these tools around criminalizing fines for trespassing, fines for drug use. What does that mean for the people who support encampment residents and drug users? Are they going to be at risk of fines? And they're tying it to funding, right? So they are bringing in this new funding. I'll say it's laughable funding. It essentially amounts to, $100 per homeless person in Ontario, the amount of funding that they're putting out there. It's not going to provide the
funding that they're announcing for eventual low housing, and then $20 million for just homelessness initiatives, whatever the fuck they think those are.
Yeah, I mean, I got an email from the province the other day. They're like, "Oh, we're going to have some more funding for some drug use things," but it's so low. It will not be able to sustain the need. In Waterloo Region, we have over 2,300 homeless people. That $100 per person is not going to provide means for that, but with these tools and these criminalizing, nonprofits and grassroots groups are desperate for these funding streams. They're desperate for these protections that comes from that. And so it's like the criminalizing plus tied to funding, it's creating this big culture of fear that what does that mean for people who are supporting, and most importantly, what does that mean for the people on the ground who are likely are going to just be experiencing more vigilante violence because the province is legitimizing their vigilante violence, or who are going to end up in prisons? Where are we going to be sending these people when there's nowhere for them to go? So to me, it's just they're building up this. It's like manufacturing consent for what I would call like martial law or trashism, if we want to say, like violence towards homeless people and people who support homeless people, violence towards drug users and people who support drug users. And we know this violence already happens, but this is definitely a huge escalation in the number of tools and especially the rhetoric that they are legitimizing in the public.
Yeah, the language, enough is enough, right? And the scapegoating of these folks for absolutely everything. So it's allowing people, it's giving people a false target for their frustrations as well. When they see this happening in the community, the conversations they're having aren't about the oppressive systems and the factors that lead to homelessness and what we can do about it. It's about just like, you know, pointing to someone that you're better than, right? It's become this really low-hanging fruit for politicians, too, to rally around. A lot of mayors trying to build their careers on it. I got a couple notes that are kind of related and unrelated. Go back to Waterloo, and I think we didn't fully explain why, you know, it's against charter rights. The judge made a ruling there, you know, they know they don't have the shelter space. Toronto knows that. They try to pretend they do, but they're pushing people out of the Delta. We haven't had a chance to really update folks on that, but it's overburdened, and you're explicitly sending them nowhere. And I'm to their death, but that's implied. But I'm sure you all have relatives where you vent to them. Perhaps you go, like my mom is the one that gets this. Sometimes I'll go, oh, Ford did this, they're doing this and this. And she's like, where do they want them to go? What do politicians want to happen? And I don't think they are prepared for the answer. I mean, you've already said it, but die. They want those people to die. That they know that is the outcome, and that's the plan.
I think we can also, yes, death is the plan, but it's also like death takes a long time. And so, I mean, they do try and do things to speed up death by, you know, fucking around with the safe supply and those kind of supports, criminalizing people so they're more vulnerable. But it's also creating this hamster wheel. It's a hamster wheel. Like, it's not just death. It is a hamster wheel of money that people make money off of. Because what happens is, okay, if I am at risk of becoming homeless, right? I can go and apply for rent supplements from the province, which will then be money from the government directly to my landlord. And those rent supplements, though, are time specific, right? And so then, they run out, and then I'm back in the same position. My landlord kicks me out onto the streets. Then I'm on the streets, and, you know, so I try to find a place to be on the streets. But then I keep getting evicted. Eventually, I'm in an encampment that's really annoying. That the government. This is what happens in Waterloo Region. There's an encampment that the government wants to get rid of, but because we have a community that stands up for them, they're like, okay, we can't forcefully remove people. So what we'll do is we'll offer them shelter beds. We will make space in motels and shelters. So we'll be paying the private motels to hold people for a temporary thing, or we'll put them in a shelter space, but then we need to keep moving people along, so we need to be paying landlords to get people out of the system, but then the landlords and so then it's just a wheel. People are just moving around, constantly moving through system, while at the same time, landlords are taking rent subs every step of the way. You know, you have companies like Canadian Tire and Walmart who are just, you know, getting hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars worth of winter supplies that are having to be given to people because we're not giving them actual spaces, but then we destroy their stuff, so then they need more supplies. So it's just this wheel of actual profit, and it's a system of where people, if you are a landlord, if you are a housing developer, if you are many retail places, you are making bank off of homelessness. And the fear of homelessness, security companies, fence companies, so there's a lot of people making money off of this wheel existing, and this structure. This is why apartheid is not the right language, because apartheid is really tied to a lot of the context of a situation like South Africa or Palestine. But it is a class, a segmented separation of people that is designed to stay in perpetuity, to maintain consent and to maintain the system of profit, and to distract from the causes of homelessness, which are landlords, right? And so let's make all the hubbub around drug use, around people in parks, about people being inconvenienced or being scared by seeing people existing in the community, so that we don't talk about why people are on the streets, which is that we have no social safety net, we have no social housing, and we are just funneling money into people who are into profit systems. Like, it's all been privatized. And I think the next logical conclusion step in my mind is that they're probably going to start bringing out private prisons to just add another spoke in the wheel of money making.
Absolutely. Even those heart hubs, and we know most of the heart hubs are going to be making people money. They're not even operational. And that's like the dangling fruit that don't worry, we're going to have these will be the solution to everything. But even our prisons right now, I think, they're at 100% capacity and in horrible conditions. And so further criminalization is just going to necessitate that kind of outcome, right? We've seen it happen in the United States. It's a model. It's not far-fetched. A few of the things about the act that folks should also know about, like David mentioned, fines, like up to $10,000. When questioned, the premier has ridiculous responses. Like, just the understanding of what happens to these folks is just unreal. Or 6 months in jail. And it's also going to make it much easier for police to arrest you for suspected drug use. Diana Chan McNally put a thread together, and she gave the example, even if they think there's drug use going on, within a tent that they can't see, they can haul you out. They can then trespass you from that property. And I mean, the conditions they've put there for a judge to have aggravating factors. So then when you go before any kind of authority, there's a likely to trespass designation that you could be deemed likely to trespass. So who would be deemed likely to trespass at the same park that has the same encampment and same support systems around it? And so that could get you that 6 months, that maximum fine, or that repeat offense kind of tag. And it's that, we say municipalities are already doing this, but this does up the ante a bit. This does add another level of fear, probably, but criminalization. That is, I shouldn't have minimized it perhaps at the beginning there.
I would expect it to be used by police services to justify increasing their budget. And I would expect it also, like I said, they have more reason to then move people, more reason to destroy their stuff, which means then that's more stuff that people need to buy for these people. So there's, again, this profit thing that's always in the background that's happening. And I think the biggest thing for the criminal, these fines, like, people who are that displaced, to a degree, it doesn't make much difference. They're already on that wheel. The wheel probably will just spin a bit faster. But what the fines are also a big risk of is, if you are a grassroots group that goes to helps encampment residents, if you are doing encampment defenses, to get a likely to trespass thing, right? You could also be getting these fines. You could also be in this kind of crackdown. So it's not just like it's increased criminalization, fueling this kind of system of this profit system spiral of death that happens. But then it's also a huge shut up, stay away there is shivers of fear throughout both the nonprofit sector and the grassroots world and the anarchist world. They are all afraid of what this means, especially as we enter into an election year, right? Because we have a change at the federal level. What are we going to see changes to CRA to align with this, right? If we have a conservative federal government, I imagine that anyone who has any kind of we'll be seeing tax code, those kind of things that are also very scary. I mean, we've been through it before, but people remember. And if this is what Doug Ford is campaigning on, what does it mean when he wins? If he thinks that this is an issue that he can campaign on, what does that mean about the consent he's manufacturing for this violence, right? He's essentially asking, this is my asking for a mandate to do even worse than this. That's what I would expect. So everyone I know is preparing for the worst, preparing for bail funds, preparing for how do we increase their security, how do we increase our how do we protect each other, and what are we going to do when when people are getting arrested? What are our approaches? And which is further draining our resources away from supporting people to how do we protect ourselves so that we can continue to support people. So again, this is, I think, that the fear level on top of it is also a huge issue of the act, and the associated ecosystem of conservative hating the poor that is attached to it.
Before we go on to our next topic, I'm going to end on a bit of a high note there, but wait, no, I've got to... I'm going to save that high note, just pin it for a second. Don't let me forget it before I move on. But when we're talking about encampment evictions and the possible implications of that, we can't ignore the fact that like dem evictions and rent evictions and other kinds of evictions are happening to people who are housed or precariously housed. And the same municipalities that are advocating for this are the same ones that are facilitating this. Ottawa, the bank block tenants that we had on not that long ago, they just went to City Hall. They tried everything they could. They seemed to have sympathetic ears on council when they explained that basically their whole block, their entire community would be just erased, and most people would end up homeless because of the rents that they have there are not available anywhere else in the city, and no amount of compensation will change that. They lost the vote. Their block is going to be torn down, and some of those people will become homeless. And so we are not gaining on the fight for like all this $20 million initiative and whatnot. None of it is making a dent in homelessness. And so this is a growing issue that they're like preparing for, right? They expect more encampments. We've seen Los Angeles and how they deal with it. They have like, it's a system of workers that just continually clear encampments every day, all day. And they're throwing out even the Narcan that they find that's been handed out by city officials to help save lives. They're just throwing that in the trash. So when David says they throw everything in the trash, I mean, like, they usually throw everything.
That's why it's Trashism.
Trashism, that's perfect. We've even had stories of folks, you know, going into the hospital to give birth and coming back, and all of their stuff has been thrown in the garbage. And community members made that clear to city workers that were there. And, you know, these are unionized city workers that do a lot of the clearing of encampments. I would love to see a little bit of movement there from labor in, you know, taking a stand there. I understand it's outside of their collective bargaining agreement, but it's really sore to see that happen. But to the bright spot, I mentioned a list of mayors that got together and, I don't know, decided to try to get on the good side of Premier Ford and all the conservatives in Ontario. But activists quickly jumped on that, first of all, because the mayors did not consult their councillors. These were just mayors that decided to sign on to a letter. They're in a club. It's called the Big City Mayors something, organization, club, Excelsior Plus. And they, a few of them renegades that really, really hate the poor and have kind of based their whole careers on it, they signed the letter. But some of those, I think it was up to 4 now. You have to follow Diana Chan McNally on Twitter. She's giving great updates. But the councils themselves are overturning it. So they are issuing democratic motions that are being voted and passed and saying, we do not want the use of the notwithstanding clause. We do not want the things that our mayor asked the premier for. So this has got to really be undermining let that be a message to all those mayors out there that trying to placating to that crowd, that politically looks like it's going to backfire on a few of those locally, because they will have to they're having turmoil within their councils, which makes them look poor, but also one of their, you know, main points. What is the mayor I'd love to hate? Cam. I'm like, who's the mayor of Cambridge?
The mayor of Cambridge is Jan Liggett.
It's a woman. No. Anyway, like some of them have just, Jan Liggett. Some of them have made like their whole, if you go to their Facebook, their Twitter page is just full of like, that is how they are ruling. Everything can just be blamed on homelessness and drug use. So I would like this not to pay off in the election. Right now, the Liberals and the NDP are kind of not here or there on this. So it's interesting how that will play out, if it will play out. Like, you're going to have to force this to be an election item, right? Like,
yeah, I agree. I think we're in a moment where there is an opportunity to push back. Like, this is a very small minority of mayors who are doing this. And as you said, they don't have necessarily the support of their whole councils. And I will even say this, like the mayor of Kitchener, Barry Verbanovic, I don't get along with him on pretty much anything. But even he like went and told off Ford, right? So like someone who is very conservative as a mayor even still said no to this. And so I think this is the time for people to really be making this actually blow back in their faces. But we need to do it before the provincial election and before this becomes legitimized, because that's the risk.
Absolutely. And people are doing the work. That's not like to lean on them. So if you don't see it locally, you can definitely start that. And yeah, go see if your mayor signed that letter. And if they did, I put a motion to one of the friendly counselors, like be chirping in their ear, or more than that. You know, we've definitely learned in the past year how to pester politicians. So deploy. But let's move on to another reason to get really frustrated with municipalities. Yay! And that usually, that's supposed to be like our hopeful land of electoral politics, where we feel like we have a little bit more influence. We can run successful independent campaigns, or in Toronto, think you won the lottery when Olivia Chow becomes mayor. And, Bow laws, what are they? I kind of, sometimes I start talking about things assuming everyone knows what I'm talking about, but we've seen it happen in Vaughan. Yeah, okay, David, sit down, buckle up. But bubble laws is probably not what they're really called, but it's like safe zones. So municipalities have been, Vaughan was one of the more notable ones. Their mayor loves to hate on Palestinian solidarity protests, because in Vaughan, there were multiple protests outside of a synagogue that got extremely heated for good reason. I mean, one motherfucker brought a nail gun, Zionist brought a nail gun. I saw so many assaults happen when I was there in Thornhill. They were selling occupied land, stolen land in the synagogue. It was a real estate sale of the occupied territories. So if anybody's out there and they hear these narratives of like, oh, mobs outside of synagogues, they're generally referring to the Thornhill location. And there were a few other ones in Ottawa, Montreal, and the United States, where it was a real estate company going around on some fucking tour into synagogues, because they were banking on, well, they wouldn't protest outside of a synagogue. Like, that makes you look so bad, right? You wouldn't dare. But this is a genocide, and the gloves are off, and there is no spot where you can go and hide from discontent, especially if you're in the act of genocide. Selling stolen, occupied Palestinian land, that is part of the genocide. And so, like, anyway, I'm sure, hopefully most of the people listening understand that. So municipalities, some councillors are being the opportunists that they are, and they're trying to do what David was talking about by giving like this kind of moral cover to the narrative they've been selling since October 7th and before that any kind of Palestinian solidarity is anti-Semitic, is a threat to Jewish people. And so they won't articulate this in the Bubble Act legislation, but this is where it's stemming from. And it's not just speculation, because if you look at the minutes from Toronto City Council discussion on this, it was clear. And thanks to Matt Elliott, a City Hall reporter, we know what happened. I mean, we could have been watching there. You could have been present. It's not secret. But Toronto passed it 17-5. So for people who live in Toronto, I'm going to name drop Bravo, which I don't enjoy doing. Fletcher, Malik, Moyes, and Perks all voted against this, but everybody else, they were gung-ho. I mean, they were sitting there feeding amendments to each other to just beef it up and make it super clear. But they had Toronto police there to answer questions about it, right? Because what it's going to do, it's going to create zones where you can't protest. And the only people who can enforce that kind of rule would be the Toronto police. So it's like the Municipalities Act again, in that these bubble zones were actually already being created even in the cities who haven't passed the law yet. And Toronto Police said as much in the meeting. They said, we already do this. I don't think the bylaw would change much, because we had protesters activists from northern Toronto area, and they had done a banner drop on an overpass, and that had been attacked by Zionists and heavy police presence, police brutality. And the response from the community was actually police and City Hall decided they would build a bubble zone around overpasses, and they tried to just make it illegal to protest on an overpass. And successfully deployed that tactic. There was not much you could do against the police pushing you off the bridge and hauling you away. So again, they're putting on paper and trying to formalize this, as they've already done in Vaughan. Some synagogues in Montreal have a bubble zone around them in response to the violence that they faced. Another notable moment from the Toronto Council, though, is they asked the police, because all of this is framed in like, these are hateful protests. And Pasternak, he's one of the councillors there in Toronto, and he's trying to make this argument that, you know, these protests aren't charter protected. And they aren't charter protected because, I quote, he knows peaceful assembly when he sees it. So the implications of this, whether you're a Palestinian solidarity activist or not, are wide. It means like arbitrarily they can declare areas off limits to you because they find your presence intimidating. That's all it takes, is a reasonable person could feel intimidated. But we've talked about on the show how a lot of the purpose of these protests aren't parades anymore. They are to intimidate our politicians. Sometimes they are to intimidate people to not enter the sale of stolen land. Like, that's where we're at. We're not asking nicely anymore. But that's never what mass demonstrations are supposed to be about. It's not just like, look how many of there are. It is an explicit threat to power. It's supposed to be. And if no one is intimidated by your protests like at all, what is it doing? What's it doing? So, okay, so maybe we won't be allowed outside hospitals and schools and churches and cultural centers. But like when you're in an urban center, that's like the whole city.
Yeah.
Because it won't just be like directly out front of a school. It will be within X amount of meters, whatever it
like
is.
A CT lot, right? Where it's like 200 meters from a school or childcare center, and it still hit like pretty much all of them. So, yeah, downtown, there's churches, schools, cultural centers everywhere.
Yeah, and like fun note, when you're at Krista Freeland's office, we'll talk about her later. We had a few segues built in for her, but anyway, I believe it's her office. Anyway, it better be now because else it's not funny. It's actually near one of the Jewish cultural centers that, you know, sits there and celebrates genocide, like they're part of the Israeli lobby, but it is by definition a Jewish cultural center, and it's like kitty corner to her office. So anytime you're there, if anybody gets a shot, it makes it look like you're actually protesting the daycare. So I could already see in my neighborhood, politicians just put their offices in the most obscure places. So it's not near any main traffic, and it's just kind of hard to get to on transit. But in urban centers, I'm guessing if there's a bubble zone, they are going to find an office within it. Or it's not far-fetched to think that it would extend to political offices, you know, where people do work and can't be intimidated, because especially that we've escalated our tactics. We're no longer just calling and emailing and begging for 5 minutes of their time on Zoom or whatever they'll spare. You know, we're going into their offices, we're sitting there, we're implying they have blood on their hands and whatnot. These are intimidation tactics of sorts. So such far-reaching implications. And to think, well, I mean, I'm not shocked at this point, but Olivia Chow implementing this, even adding amendments to it. And it's going to directly impact negatively the very people who put her in office.
Yeah, I think there's just such a lack of bravery in this entire culture we are living in, and it's most obvious in our political class. But I experience it, you know, with bureaucrats, and I think it's something we have to actually really have some conversations of around safety and risk. Because this is what, if you care about unsheltered residents, like we are having conversations now about you're going to be criminalized. So how do you do that? Like, how do you push through? Like, we have to actually resist the fear of risk, because otherwise we will all become Olivia Chow's. We will all just let ourselves cop out on value after value after value because we're not willing to take any courage, any bravery at all, right? And I think, yeah, these laws are, I think it's kind of like and I know this was not on the agenda, but you know how like Luigi Mangione like is like making
He
very
was in the agenda.
oh
Anyway,
good
keep
well,
going.
but it's making very visible,
Okay, let's
right?
talk about
Like
Luigi.
the
Look,
whole
I'm
situation,
blushing.
but it makes very visible, right? That there's
Yeah.
like there's the laws of the state, and then there's where the heart, like where there's the heart of the people are, right? And so even though they're like throwing every law of the state against Luigi, like the public hasn't changed their perspective. People can see right through it. And this is like we need that culture for all that. Like we need to be able to look at all these stupid laws that are deeply criminalizing and be able to turn those into like help people see through them and see that like yeah, a lot of us are probably going to end up in criminalized states, but like those states are only a deterrent if our community allows them to be and doesn't see through the facade of what these tools are. So these bubble laws, they suck ass, but like I also say, if you are an organizer, don't fucking give them power. Like do not protest, go into the bubble on purpose and face that risk and force the community to see how stupid these laws are, right?
Well, that's the only way you end up with those court cases, first of all, but those could be expensive. But let me talk about other ways that you can do that. And I wish I was a little more savvy at the moment. I feel like I'll be too distracted if I start dropping links. But we had an episode with the Toronto Community Justice Fund.
Mm-hmm.
I think we called it just that. Anyway, they are trying to create or have created a community in which it is safer and more possible for people to do what David's talking about break unjust laws or push through despite the fear of criminalization. And so, yes, obviously that means like bail money, but it also means having movement lawyers that will obviously advocate for you, but in a way that is also beneficial to the movement. And they have created a network. Like in Toronto, for example, they've tried to connect all of the arrestees since October 7th that have been charged for doing Palestinian solidarity work. So it's garnered you into a club of sorts, right? People to lean on, to share experience with. That also includes having an extra place to stay, providing someone a place to rest from the chaos that happens when you're criminalized, from police harassing you and or perhaps being doxxed and whatnot. And so there's many support systems that you would already kind of have amongst good friends that you can create amongst your activist organizations that will help ease the pain of what's coming, because it's inevitable. And yeah, to give them an inch is they'll take a mile, right? This will happen over and over. Any capitulation we make at this point is one too many, because we've lost so much ground that there's not an inch. It's like not one. So it's what is it? It's every citizen's duty to disobey an unjust law. That includes bylaws. So that's what we have to say for those bubble laws. So for Toronto, it's actually not too late. They have just asked staff to draft a proposal on a bubble law. But if you look at Thornhill at Vaughan, it did go through, and it is really open-ended in its verbiage. So folks can still organize around Toronto Council, making that a political cost to them. Be interesting to see where that goes. But we've mentioned Freeland, I think, a couple times already. I mean, when we were chatting before about the victims to communism, I thought, there's a big blank spot. Someone should etch her name in it, because Freeland is surely or will surely be a victim to communism, or at least like the Canadian public would like to think, because Justin Trudeau, he's a communist, right? And if he's a communist, what is jug meat? So if you haven't been paying attention to Canadian politics, I'll give you the headline, then we'll get David's first reaction, because my mouth is dry. But Chrystia Freeland, she's held numerous prestigious positions within the Liberal cabinet. Most recently, it was her position as Minister of Finance that's caused all the kerfuffle. JT decided, well, my guess is, at least she's telling people she was not happy with his gimmicky antics, presumably she's talking about the GST holiday and all the checks that were set to get in January to help pay for Christmas. But
sometimes
just
even
vote grabs.
Gets a good point in, because she's not wrong. They are shit gimmicks.
So it's so hard. Yeah, like I feel like you need a little asterisk, like where I go after her, but like, by the way, I also hate, like, fuck Trudeau. Yes, I want the bumper sticker, but I can't have it because that means I'm on a different side, right? What if I have an upside down Canadian flag? Will people know where I'm coming from? But like Freeland, oh man, Freeland, I hinted towards it earlier. I hate her so much. I mean, so much. She has increased military spending like astronomically, and she would continue to do so. She's investing Canadian pension into AI. And I mean, the list goes on, but my personal grievance with her was when I was running in a by-election. It was just same by-election that Jugmeat had to run to get it in his seat. I was running the same time over in York Simcoe. This is the same time that bitch tried to stage a coup in Venezuela with all of her friends, and I had something to say about it. I don't even think it was directed at her. It was just like the Canadian government in general. It was really snarky. It was one of those really mad tweets that you maybe shouldn't do when you're running for office, but I probably shouldn't have been running for office. Anyway, that not only triggered a really angry phone call from headquarters as I was headed to my first ever televised debate. I was like, you guys haven't called me for shit, but you're calling me to tell me to take down a tweet. I didn't. But Chrystia Freeland gets up in the House of Commons and says that I should apologize. Somehow I got on her agenda, my little fucking tweet that didn't even really go viral. She had something to say about that, and it was just like, this woman is now resigning on GST checks. Her government has participated in genocide. She, like, again, the list is so long for reasons to hate Freeland. Not even touching on her finger in South America, but she is going to take a stand on GST checks. That's her hill she's going to die on. Or not. We don't know. Will she be the next leader of the Liberal Party?
I mean, one can dream, right? And I'm sure she does every night. Yeah, I don't know. I think Freeland is very interesting, like how her persona is and how we're supposed to, as the public, receive her. Because like every single thing that I hear about her as like one of the things that makes her Canada's one of the leading politicians is just like her being like a footstool for imperialism, right? Like it just seems that's her main vibe is selling imperialism around the world, sucking up to the US, selling, like, you know, and it's like,
what does she do with her free time, I wonder?
Well, definitely don't watch Disney Plus, that's for sure, because, you know, poor Canadians. Yeah, and so I don't know. It's just, I think it's very embellic of this moment that, you know, the Liberal Party is having this crash between its like imperial side and its imperial side, and I think it makes me wonder what does come next, right? Like, is this a move to try and have her take over next? Because I think, if, you know, for all of Trudeau's faults, he's more focused on himself, where I think she's very more focused on how can we expand the imperial core.
Yeah, I would rather have this vain narcissist, I think, than someone stumping for the imperialist core. But yeah. There's no doubt, like, for, again, like, her grandfather was a Nazi. She celebrates him. I mean, she was probably one of the donors to the memorial who had a name taken off, to be honest. But and I hate the Liberals.
Yes.
And I hate the Conservatives, just like for posterity, right? Because what I'm about to say next always confuses people. I also don't like the NDP for another new reason. We have the base. I'm no longer NDP base, but sometimes I say we, like when someone dies and you keep using the current tense. We, the base, the NDP base, have been begging Jagmeet to vote no confidence on the Liberals, to bring down the Liberals is the language you'll hear, for so many things. Everyone has not a niche issue, but things that are close to their heart, maybe very personal impacts. But Genocide is one of them, but there are many. I mean, Trudeau's handling of COVID, his scapegoating of migrants, his support for Israel, his ordering back of workers. Canada Post was not the first. And none of these triggered the NDP to pull down their confidence. They, I guess, still had little tidbits that they wanted to get out of the Liberals. Maybe that's the story they'll tell us. But now you are finally seeing Jagmeet on the mic, standing there going, his time is done. He needs to resign. I'm bringing this government down. But it had nothing to do with all those dead Gazan children.
Nope.
It's an opportunity he has seen, right? He is watching the Liberal Party in turmoil. If Trudeau resigns, there is an interim leader that's usually weak sauce for an election. Plus, you get a lot of backstabbing nonsense that's already going on, right? So they're looking at this going, now, don't get me wrong, they're not looking at this saying, oh, we can go into an election right now and beat the Conservatives, because they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
They just want to capitalize on any. If Jagmeet can gain 1-2 seats out of an election, he will jump up and down on that stage like he's done by losing seats and declare a victory for himself and his staff and his regime.
Yep.
Or in the status quo at the NDP. This is, look, by cozying up to the center, by moving to the right, we have gained seats. By looking like the Liberals, we've usurped them like they've done in other provinces. But to those provinces' detriment in the end.
Yep.
So I don't know what he's playing at here, because his base all must be thinking the same thing. Like, now, like, surely they see through this. And I'll tell you, the NDP isn't ready for an election either. They don't have candidates nominated in all of their ridings. They don't have an eager, excited base. They have a burnt out base right now. I mean, everyone is on fumes, if they're even part of that party anymore. So I think he's thinking he'll be able to appeal to people who saw him as the man who finally took Trudeau down. But it's too little too late.
I think Pierre's already stolen all that thunder for any of the anti-Trudeauers, the people who just wanted Trudeau gone. Pierre's taken up all that oxygen, and so I don't know what Jagmeet has who's he appealing to, right? So yeah, it is very frustrating because, frankly, from the perspective of a homelessness advocate, homelessness is caused by the federal government. They're the ones who built up our affordable housing capacity and then stopped, right? And then let it just completely disappear for decades, and then now are just funneling public dollars into the private sector as if that's going to fix housing, right? So they have completely failed housing. But people are very anxious about housing. Do you see it feels like Jagmeet is literally just parroting Pierre at this point and following Pierre's lead, which is what kind of winning strategy is that? And I have huge concerns for the federal level. I really wish there was a clear direction to give people other than what I've been advocating for, which is municipal sovereignty, right? In the sense that I think we need to, as our local areas, really just challenge every candidate until they are forced to listen to us. I think, for example, in Waterloo Region, the reason I think about this a lot is because we have one of the only 2 Green MPs in the entire country. And so I'm if we challenge Mike, we can push our agenda through Mike far easier than we can anywhere else. But other than that, I don't have a hopeful narrative for the federal election. I see a bunch of people wasting our time and wasting so much money. And this is, if you don't mind me ranting, but this is
that's what it's called.
The piece that makes me so angry is all the people who are so mad at Trudeau that they can't see the forest for the trees. The federal government just wastes money. That's all they do. But the people who make you suffer are the provinces. The provinces make us suffer. And when I saw what happened in British Columbia, where people were oh, I'm voting out Justin Trudeau today. No, you weren't. It was a freaking provincial election. I'm how... I want to do is appropriate those fuck Trudeau signs, those flags, and just say fuck Ford, and be this is who you actually should be angry at. Trudeau, the whole federal government is just a waste of time at this point. You know, we need to deal with our actual material realities, which is being fucked at the provincial levels. And so I'm like, I don't know. I just want the federal government to go away for a bit, because they pull focus from the issues that are really impacting the community.
So that burst of laughter earlier was when you're like, I don't know what to tell people, because I can't tell you how many like my DMs are always full of people who should I vote for then?
Right?
You always complain about everybody, right? You say the NDP or the Liberal, Conservative, you have reasons why they're all bad. And this is true. And I don't often have a good answer. Like, it's like, well, vote for whoever you want, but don't go into those spaces and just work unquestioningly. You know, don't just go put in the labor for people who don't have your voice, right? Or who pretending to have your voice in your back. Like, that's where my beef is. But it's really hard to advise people on what to do there in terms of, I still get people, and I feel like I'm going to be like personally attacking friends, but you know who you are. People still run for the NDP candidates, and they want my opinion on it. And I avoid, so if anybody's like waiting for me to message them back on that, I purposely avoid that conversation with a lot of people, because I feel like you obviously know how I feel because you're close to me and you hear me, and I've documented it quite extensively. But it's like, do you want me to talk you out of it? Because I don't think that's my place, right? So I guess it seems to be like this personal journey that people have to have in politics to experience it. But then you better understand it rather than hearing it. I mean, don't just take it from me. I mean, I would love to spare a lot of people the grief, but, you know, to each their own. I think people think they can make impact, and they try, and then there's no harm in that. But there's a lot of politicians like me. I can't speak for your Green candidate there, but where you can waste a lot of time trying to spearhead them, and they will smile and nod back at you, like some of the bank block tenants described their councillors doing. But then when it came time to vote or speak up for them on council, they just sat there with their hands down, like nothing to say. And so I've seen so many people just greatly disappointed by the energies that they've poured into making alliances with politicians. I called out Ontario Place for All for that a little bit. They really did cozy up to Olivia Chow as part of their strategy. And she just sold Ontario Place to Ford. And it left them really with nowhere to go at all, because it was kind of a done deal by that point. If you can't even get your progressive mayor of the city to kind of go to bat for you on that one, then no one is going to. So, yeah, it's just like cautionary tale. But before we sign off from our very first Rabble Rants, I appreciate the people who have joined us. I see a lot of patrons in the chat, and I very much appreciate you folks. You keep the lights on, just so you know. Yes, you allow us to do things like this and stream on programs that allow us to get more reach. But I have some updates that are kind of related to the episodes we put out. So once again, if you haven't caught our new episode, it's with Jews Say No to Genocide. They went to Ottawa recently. They staged a big sit-in that got a lot of great media. They unpacked that with us, right? What led to the decision to do that, what they wanted to get out of it, how they did or didn't, how they measured that as a success or not, and where they go from there. But it's also like a really deep conversation about the identity crisis a lot of Jewish activists are facing in their communities with the weaponization of anti-Semitism and the Israeli lobby trying to define what being Jewish is or isn't. And so, yeah, it was a really candid conversation with Serena and Lauren from Jews Say No to Genocide. I mentioned the bank block tenants. I mentioned the bad news. The updates are mostly good. So they are continuing their fight. Their last line in the statement that they have on their Instagram, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but their last line is what really matters to me. They didn't like the deal that came out, and people are trying to celebrate it like it's a victory, and to them it is not. And they say the process of going through City Hall, The process was a reminder that as tenants, our greatest power comes from working together and taking control of our own condition through organized resistance. Meaning their sit-downs with other politicians simply wasted their time. Mm-hmm. And they are going to stick to acts of defiance. Like right now, their latest action was postering the hell out of this luxury gym. And this is interesting because the gym is owned by an investor in the project to displace them. And so it's not just the developer that's facing the ire and the naming and shaming. They're going after key investors and where they live and their other businesses and telling the community, this person is responsible for this harm. And so not even investors can remain anonymous or, I didn't know what my money was doing, and are kind of bearing some consequence.
Yes, and I really target the investor class, make them sweat.
Yes, even if it's pension plans, because a lot of issues we talk about, people kind of get to this point, they're like, well, we can't do anything about it because the teacher's pension's all wrapped up in that, and if real estate investment things fail, then all of these pension funds will fail. And so it's starting to eat away at the fact that the investor class can just be kind of non-actors, passive participants in social murder. And that's no longer the case. So that is a high note. The Mask Off Maersk campaign, well, it's been going on for a long time, but really kicked off about a week ago now. That is a cargo company that supplies a lot of people. It's massive, but specifically the IDF. And so the Palestinian Youth Movement, along with a lot of allies, started a campaign to mask off, like let people know it's not just weapons manufacturers and politicians that have blood on their hands. There's companies, the way David described companies making money off homelessness. There's a lot of Canadian and US companies making a lot of money off the genocide. So if you go to Mask Off Maersk, which is MAERSK, so I apologize if I'm not saying that right, .com, maskoffmaersk.com/take action. I guess I could drop this in the chat. I can manage that. Maybe.
I can do it.
Okay. You can go and join the action there. So they had live action, direct actions. They're obviously done for this week, but you can still help the cause. And I just wanted a special shout out to Luigi. We did an episode about Luigi's case and the U.S. healthcare system and the public's response to, the broad daylight murder of a family man is, I think, was a class consciousness awakening moment for everybody. I've never seen the working class so united, but I'm not going to go over that. Like, we did a whole episode, but one of the updates there is, yes, he is now facing federal charges. They are trying to vilify this man, which is only feeding into the frenzy. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it's got to be the photo of the year now. It's
the bridge one with all the soldiers behind him. It looks like straight out of like a comic book.
It has like Joker vibes.
Yeah.
Where he's in his yellow orange jumpsuit with cuffed, and everyone shouldering him behind him is in all black hats, weapons, armor, and that shot there just turns him into a superhero. Like, it's just they're just elevating his status amongst the working class in the way that they're treating him. Now, the implications of the death penalty, or of the federal charges, I spoiled it there, didn't I, is that he could be facing the death penalty, which, again, I'm not sure they're handling this in the ways that I think if they knew it was good for them, they would just not ever talk about it again. Like, even the media, just like pretend Luigi never happened. You do that all the time. It makes me wonder, like, why are they propping up Luigi? Are we supposed to be looking somewhere else? Like, why would you allow the continued platform when you see what people's reaction is? We ended our episode with that one ditty about United Health, I'm not going to sing for anybody. That would be mean. But I mean, he's turned into a folk hero of sorts, and we unpack this on our Discord. the other day where, you know, folks struggling with that celebrating violence part of it. But I read a tweet again, or no, she's not on Twitter anymore. Kim Crawley is on Blue Sky. I can't even keep track of all these places, David. Anyway, a bunch of us have migrated over to Blue Sky. And on there, I mean, she said something that I probably thought many times, but very simple. It's like, what nonviolent avenues have they left? You know, can we point to huge gains that were meant non-violently anymore? And it's just like, that's a very dangerous place for them to put people. So I don't know. I just like, we weren't not going to chew on that because we're at the end, but it is a greater conversation. And
meditating violence, everyone. Have some good thoughts on violence while we leave you today.
Maybe I should have picked a different update to end on. Do you have any more updates?
No, I love it. I think you should.
Okay.
Actually, this is something I work with people on the streets, and they are constantly talking about violence because they are experiencing violence constantly. And I think it's actually those of us who feel like we are immune from violence or separate from violence that actually need to start doing a little inventory of our own relationship to violence. What violence is actually are we experiencing, and what violences are we allowing to perpetuate? And, you know, play around with that, because I'm not advocating violence, but we live in violence, and so we need to actually have a healthy relationship for it.
I think we'll end on that note. David, I thank you so much, because for folks who just like tuning in or watching later, we really just threw this together. I've always meant to come on live and start to unpack Canadian news from, you know, a leftist, anarchist, you know, activist kind of perspective and how it impacts the work on the ground. But I never got my act together. And I reached out to David and I was like, David, can you folks, they tweeted about it. You know, if you tweet about something and I don't know it, I will call you in and be like, can you help me understand it? And he really did. And not only that, he was totally game for like, can you do it live? Sure. What if we talk about like a whole bunch of other things too? Yeah. You know, that's cool. And then ready to go live. Yeah, just hit the button. Let's do this. And it was such a pleasure. It was such a pleasure, David. Thank you so very much. And yeah, thanks to the audience. You can share this once the stream ends. And if you haven't already, make sure you find Blueprints of Disruption wherever you catch your podcasts, as well as Rabble Rants, which is more of this kind of vibe, unpacking semi-Canadian news items and ranting about them. So your rants were welcome, David.
Bless.
Have a good Friday, everybody.
Peace all.